Hey everybody, Dr. Jared Skowron from Spectrum Awakening. Now, if you don't remember this, this is my flower of autism. These are 7 different parts of the body that are affected in autism. Some kids have autoimmunity. Many kids, if not all of them, have abnormal brain chemistry levels. Everybody needs help with detoxification. Some kids have problems with genetics. Most kids have problems with their gut or digestion, need dietary changes. Some have hormonal problems, and about half have mitochondrial problems. These are the 7 different parts of the body that can be affected in a child with autism. So we've got to go through all of those. Today, we're going to be focusing on these 2, genetics and detoxification. So let's get into why does my child have autism, all right? Now, in my opinion, and what I've seen medically, again, over almost 20 years, there's 2 major causes of autism, okay? And if we can figure out which your child is in, we're gonna guide you to the right treatments and the faster treatments. So I typed this thing up and printed it today. I hope it makes sense. This is the prequel to the Skowron solution. We're gonna answer the question of why does my child have autism? So I believe there are 2 major causes. Number 1, your child could be born with a genetic condition, okay? So let me just stop there. We're born with certain genetics. Our genetics are half mom and half dad. But sometimes when the sperm meets the egg, the Xerox machine gets a little confused and changes one of those genes, okay? So we have a change in one of our genes, and if that change happens in a gene that's very important, all of a sudden we may be born with a genetic disease. So this can be something like Fragile X. This can be something like Down syndrome. This can be something like a microdeletion or a microduplication syndrome or a myriad of other genetic conditions that cause the symptoms of autism. So, I often ask the question, well, if my child has a genetic disease, do they really have autism? And that's an unanswered question because autism is a subjectively diagnosed condition. Child walks in to the evaluator and says, hey, am I speaking? Am I making eye contact? How's my learning? How's my mood, behavior, sensory, motor function, all that stuff. And we look at the child's symptoms and subjectively say, yeah, that kind of fits all these boxes of autism. So you're diagnosed with autism. There's not an objective test. There's no blood work. There's just, hey, you look like somebody who is delayed in their development enough that we're going to give you this diagnosis, okay? But what if you were born that way? What if you were born with a genetic condition and you don't know that yet? And you don't know that yet because you haven't done the testing and the analysis. So it's important to do that testing, especially if you feel your child was delayed from birth. So again, that 0 to 12 month time frame, were they developing slower than an average kid, all right? And that often is a red flag for genetic conditions causing autism. So let me go back to this page. Was my child born with a genetic condition, which could be, and again, we'll get to this point, treatment in a minute, but were they born with a genetic condition? What's the other option? The other option is, I can't even hold this straight, developmental regression due to toxins. Now let's talk about what is a developmental regression. Well, that means your child was, first 12, 15, 18 months is developing pretty typically on average. I've got some words, I got some eye contact, I got some playing and engagement. Then all of a sudden, gone, disappeared. All that language, all that interaction, all that eye contact disappears and regresses. That's a developmental regression, which is very, very common. So you've got to decide, hey, is my kid born with a problem? Which, because there were developmental delays from birth in those first 12 months of life, or was it a developmental regression, which is normally due to toxins, okay? You've got to say, hey, is my kid in one or the other? Now, you can be both, all right? You can be born with a genetic disease and then have a regression on top of it, okay? That's obviously a little bit more complicated to treat, but it's possible. So we've got to figure out, again, red flag wise, if you feel your child was delayed from the beginning, okay, or maybe you did not notice a regression, then there's likely a genetic condition, okay? If your child was developing normally until 12, 15, 18 months, and all of a sudden everything disappeared, that's more sign of a regression. Now, again, what causes the genetic condition? You're born with it, all right? What causes the developmental regression? It's toxins. Now, what I often hear about with my patients is, hey, if my kid has a genetic condition, why do I care? Well, I can't do anything about it. And that is an urban myth, all right? Many genetic conditions are treatable. Now, you can't cure a genetic condition because your DNA will always be your DNA, but can I treat it and make it better? So now let's take that genetic part and show you a research study. This is a research study published last year from Harvard. Okay, this is the pathogenic yield of genetic testing in autism. And what the docs at Harvard showed is that 12% of their kids with autism had pathogenic findings in their genetic testing, which means 12% of the kids that they did genetic testing on who had a diagnosis of autism had a genetic condition they were born with. So 12%, obviously not a majority, but a decent amount. Now, what was more interesting is there was no significant difference in the cognitive function, language function, or motor function of the kids who had a genetic condition versus the kids who did not have a genetic condition. So we can't look at kids' symptoms with autism and say, you know what, you're more severe, you've got a genetic condition, you're more mild, you don't. That's not what this study says. What this study says is anybody of these kids with autism could have a genetic condition they feel is 12%, regardless of the symptoms that you see. My red flag is this lack of regression at 12 to 18 months. Okay, so if you see things earlier, definitely want to check it out. All right, now this is the important part. Medical recommendations in response to the genetic testing were made for 72% of those with bad pathogenic genetic results. Okay, so this is the key here. Even if you are born with a genetic condition, this research says 72% of what they found is treatable. So this is why we do testing. We do testing to find the answer to why and to find the answer for treatments. Okay, so if you feel your child was part of that, what test do you want? All right, what you want is a CMA, a WES, a Fragile X, or a whole genome. These are the genetic tests. These are conventional genetic tests that will diagnose genetic disease. And again, 12% odds that might be your child with autism. So let's get it done, okay? And again, what treatments do we get based on these genetic test results? Honestly, they're completely individualized based on the child. There's 20,000 genes. If you've got this gene abnormal, you got to treat that. You have this gene abnormal, you got to treat that. The treatments are totally different. There's no uniformity to it. But the testing should be done. Now, where can we get this testing done? The CMA, the WES, the Fragile X, the whole genome. You got two choices, okay? Choice number one, go to your doctors. Go to your doctor and say, hey, I want to look at genetic testing for my kid because these really smart people from Harvard say I got 12% odds that my child's going to have something, and then 72% of that, I can find a treatment. So let's do this testing because it's going to help a good 9% of our kids on the spectrum. Okay, so that's number one. So ask your doctors for that testing. Insurance may cover it when your doctor orders it, but make sure you get pre-approval from insurance because it's pretty costly. Now, we've got a cash option on our end. But let me take a step back. Usually the genetic testing at your doc's order is a blood test. We've got this exact same genetic test on our Spectrum Awakening website, which is a cheek swab. So it's a Q-tip and you just swab your cheek, boom, you send it in, no blood draw necessary. However, ours is going to be out of pocket. There's no insurance. There's no insurance with the lab we use. We use the biggest genetic lab in the world. They're out of Germany. So, American insurance isn't going to work with Germany. So you can pay for it out of pocket on our website. You'll get the Q-tip, swab your cheek, send it in. We'll send you the results, and I will write up a medical interpretation and treatments based on what we found. So you can get it either way. You can get it through your doc, you can get it through our website. All depends if you want to go blood or cheek swab, or do you want to try insurance or pay out of pocket cash. Those are the different options that you have. All right, now let's move on to, okay, maybe my kid was not born with a genetic condition. Maybe they had an obvious developmental regression. What does that developmental regression look like? Well, again, as we briefly talked about, somewhere between 12 to 18 months, the language, the eye contact, the engagement regresses and disappears, and it's gone. Why does this happen? Okay. You know what? Isha just asked a question, which one is more accurate, the blood test or the saliva test? They're completely identical in accuracy. There's no difference in the quality of the results. It's just, do I want to do a blood or a cheek swab, and who's going to pay for it? That's honestly the two big differences, but both of them are exactly as accurate as one another. Now, let's say you got that developmental regression. That is due to toxins. However, there are genetic predispositions. And I say genetic predispositions because kids, again, we go back to this Harvard study, all right? 88% of kids with autism we're not born with it genetically, based on this research paper. So there still is a genetic predisposition for why does my kid have a regression, but all these other kids don't, okay? And Sasha just said, can insurance cover the cheek swab option? Not through our website. If you want to ask your physician, then you can have that conversation with them. So let's get back into it. There are genetic predispositions for who will have a regression and who won't based on certain toxins, okay? So if you're interested in the genetic predisposition testing, that's called a SNP analysis. That has to do with MTHFR, glutathione genetics, COMT genetics, other detoxification genetics, etc. This SNP testing is completely different than this genetic CMAWES whole genome testing, okay? So they're two independent genetic analyses that don't cross over. Excuse me. So if you want to know why your child regressed, it's going to be in this genetic test here, okay? Now, this is completely treatable as well, okay? If something happened to a child and regressed them, we're going to do everything we can to reverse that regression and bring about recovery in your child. So how do we do that? Well, there is a whole line of treatments, and obviously all the biomedical work that we do and other docs do, there is a lot involved in the biomedical treatment of reversing a regression, but it's doable, okay? This is what our Facebook Live series starting today is going to bring about. We're going to talk about different treatments for those kids who had developmental regression, okay? And again, if you want to get that genetic testing done and find out why you had the regression, this SNP analysis will tell you. And again, most SNP analysis tests are not covered by insurance. We've got one on our website. You can get ours. It is a cheek swab as well. There's a bunch of other of these SNP analyses online that you can get, you can get these tests done as well. So the testing is everywhere. You just want to make sure you've got somebody knowledgeable to interpret the results, because there are many things. A lot of people look for MTHFR, and MTHFR is important. Don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of other genes that are just as important as MTHFR. MTHFR has a lot of good press. So we want to make sure we treat that toxicity. So let's take a step back as to, okay, what's causing those toxins? Well, number one, let's talk about heavy metals. Okay, heavy metals is a big important part of the toxins that our kids deal with. This is a research study just published this summer, Autism, the Pathogenesis and Severity. They found high toxic metal burden of aluminum, arsenic, mercury, lead, beryllium, nickel, and cadmium in our kids with autism, and also noted that children with ASD present a reduced ability of eliminating toxic metals that leads to these metals accumulating and aggravating autistic symptoms. So again, if we're born with the genetics of poor detoxification, if we're born with genetics that alter brain chemistry function, we are at a higher risk for having a developmental regression into autism, okay? The genes didn't cause the autism in this case, but they set us up for the regression when we had the toxins. Now, another huge toxin that is being more and more researched as one of the causes of autism, and again, we just talked about this a few weeks ago on Facebook Live, is Tylenol. Now, Tylenol is a very popular anti-fever, anti-pain medication. You also know it as acetaminophen. For those people outside the US, you may know it as paracetamol or Calpol, okay? So this study is my favorite, and I talk about it all the time. This is a research study from scientists at Duke and Harvard. They talk about the role of oxidative stress, inflammation, and acetaminophen, again, same thing as Tylenol, paracetamol, Calpol, in the induction of autism. So how does Tylenol do that? Well, let me just say this. Tylenol can be toxic. Every emergency room in every hospital across the world has a protocol to detox for Tylenol poisoning, all right? There is a toxic component to it. And let me explain how that, did I even have that? Yes, how that toxicity occurs. So that toxicity occurs because acetaminophen needs to be detoxified, okay? Acetaminophen needs to leave the body as a non-toxic metabolite, and that is through something called sulfation. Sulfation, which involves glutathione, is the pathway that the body removes Tylenol, acetaminophen, paracetamol. okay? If you have bad sulfation genetics, if you have bad glutathione genetics, you can't remove acetaminophen to a non-toxic metabolite. What you do is you turn it into a highly toxic metabolite called NAPQI, which is then reduced to a non-toxic metabolite through glutathione pathways. Again, so sulfation, glutathione is made of sulfur, so there's a glutathione link with the sulfation, but if you are born with both bad sulfation and glutathione detox genetics, you are going to create this heavily toxic Tylenol chemical that will affect your liver and your brain. And this is where we're seeing a lot of kids regress into autism. Now, here's another picture from the study that I find very interesting. This is a picture that shows all the risk factors on how to get autism. That includes infection. Geez, where would we be injected with an infection at 18 months? I can't think of what would do it. Also heavy metals, problems with vitamin B metabolism, and other things. Add that onto acetaminophen, and then boom, you go down the road of autism when you have the genetic predisposition. This is obviously not for everybody, because most kids go in with Tylenol and and other problems and don't get autism. You've got to have this genetic predisposition for poor detoxification. All right. So now what's really interesting, here's two graphs from the same study that I wanted to highlight for you. This is the rate of autism based on year of birth. Okay. And as you can see here in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we get a lot of skyrocketing. Okay. And at that time, here's the same graph, here's the years. This line are symptoms of autism evidently shortly after birth. Okay, a little bit of increase. Here are symptoms of autism that become evident at 18 months. You see that skyrocket, okay? Before 1980s, genetic autism and regressive autism were basically the same rates. But here in the 80s, you had a skyrocketing of this developmental regression. So that really shows us these two different types of causes of autism. Again, you're born with it, with a genetic thing, or you have a developmental regression because of toxins. One of those toxins is presumably Tylenol. So what the heck do I do with all this info? All right. Here's what I want you to do. And again, this is step one. This is prequel, is why does my child have autism? Because that's going to guide you to two totally different types of treatments for your child. So let me finish up kind of this little summary, and then we'll answer all the live questions we have. So again, why does my child have autism? 12% of kids, based on this Harvard study, were born with a genetic condition which could be treated. If you think that's the case because your child was delayed from birth, or if you have a child who's a non-responder, if you have tried so many different things and nothing's helped your kid, probably a genetic condition. So get the testing done. Again, CMA, WES, whole genome, Fragile X. Get this done through your doc. Get the test on our website. Doesn't matter where you get it, you gotta get the info, all right? And those treatments are based on the results of this testing. Now, if you had a developmental regression, odds are it's due to toxins. If you wanna know the genetic reason for the regression, get the SNP testing done. Again, it looks at your methylation, your glutathione genetics, your sulfation genetics, etc. How do I treat that? Well, the first thing you're gonna do is start with detoxification for what happened at the moment of regression, all right? This is where we have our new detox regression homeopathics. And we did sell out of them just a couple days after we launched our first Facebook Live about these. We do have them on order from the factory, so you can pre-order these, and we should get them in next week, knock on wood, then we'll send them out. But these are homeopathic acetaminophen. Okay, this is what you're going to get. Homeopathics help detoxify and help reverse the cause of problems. So homeopathic acetaminophen can support reversing the toxicity of the Tylenol, the paracetamol, the acetaminophen. It also includes homeopathic MMR. This is not MMR. This is not a vaccine. This is a homeopathic preparation of it, again, that helps reverse the problems that may have been caused at that time. So if you've got a child who regressed, please, I encourage you, start our homeopathic acetaminophen and our homeopathic MMR as the first stage of helping your child with recovery. Then, after you start that, we're going to start the Skowron solution, which is a delineated, easy to do protocol to help balance brain chemistry. And that's what we're going to be talking next week, our new protocol for speech and behavior that balances brain chemistry. And that is going to be a really nice, concrete, instructive things to do. So if you're new to the biomedical world or you want some kind of nice delineated protocol, tune in next week. We're going to be launching this, and tune into that Autism Parenting Magazine Summit. You'll hear me for a good 45 minutes and a PowerPoint presentation about all this stuff. So that's what's next week. But what this is all going to do, the treatments on your genetic conditions or the homeopathic detoxification and the Skowron solution, will put your child on the road to recovery, more language, more focus and interaction, more awareness, and better physical health, sleeping, gut health, etc. I want to help you guys, guide you through from A to Z. So this is step A. Is my child born with it? Let's do the genetic testing. Or did my child regress and there's some toxins in there? We're going to start focusing on homeopathic treatments of homeopathic acetaminophen, homeopathic MMR, get you on the road. And then next week, we're going to add in the brain chemical balancing protocol, the Skowron solution. So this is step 1 of a series. I want to guide you through it, X, Y, Z, so you know what to do. Obviously, with this type of with any kind of treatment, there's going to be alterations. There's going to be different things that you can adjust that works better for your child, but it's always nice to start with a definitive outline. So we'll get to that outline next week, but I highly encourage you to get this genetic testing done if you haven't had it done before.